What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today, since Fallen Order is only just around the corner, I did want to make a little bit of a discussion video about 5 things that I really want from Jedi Fallen Order. And then in about a week from now, I will follow up with another 5 things that I really don't want from Jedi Fallen Order as well. I'm sure you guys can tell by the increasing amount of Fallen Order videos on the channel that I am actually getting very keen for this game to drop on November 15th. I do still have my worries about the game just simply because of EA's reputation with the Star Wars IP, but honestly everything we've seen so far looks pretty enjoyable to me. There's no microtransactions, there's no glaring issues from what we can see, so it's safe to say that as a Star Wars fan and a gamer, it is hard not to be excited no matter how much I try and temper my expectations. So, like I said in this video, I wanted to touch on 5 things that I really am hoping to get from Fallen Order. All of these things are pretty realistic in my opinion. There's nothing really crazy on this list that's almost guaranteed to not happen. So I am hopeful for all of these, but at the same time, like I said, I am trying to temper my expectations, so we will have to wait and see what happens. So the first thing on my list is to do with the skill tree, and that is that I really want it to be an in-depth, detailed skill tree in which we can really kind of customize Cal and his playstyle and tailor it to how we want to play the game rather than everyone sharing the same experience. One thing that I think instantly improves a good single player game is allowing for players to somewhat have a unique playthrough. For example, my playthrough might be different than your playthrough and yours might be different than your friends, and by doing that it allows everyone to experience the same story overall but still allows you to play the game how you want to play it rather than it being a linear cookie cutter experience. My mind instantly goes to a game like Skyrim where you can kind of play in so many different ways, leveling up different skill trees where you can focus on being a mage or being a warrior or even just playing stealthily. There are so many options for playstyles in that game, and because of that it had arguably the most replay value of any game ever made. For a game like Fallen Order, there are so many options that they could include in this skill tree. Options like focusing on your force powers to make Cal really powerful when it comes to using the force, which would in turn mean that he lacks a little bit with the lightsaber. Or you could focus on your saber skills and become really strong in lightsaber combat, but then in turn your force powers wouldn't be quite as strong. Another thing that they could do, and shout out to my man Charm for giving me this idea, is that they could actually even have part of the skill tree where you can actually focus on your specific lightsaber form. So you could focus on, say, Form 3, which is much more of a defensive style of fighting, or you could focus on Form 7, which was much more aggressive, meaning you'd be much more open to enemy attacks, but you could also take enemies out a little faster, or you could even just mix certain forms together and make your own playstyle even more unique. Having options like these would just make the game so much more enjoyable and add a touch of replay value to it as well. Whether or not they go down that path, I'm honestly not too sure, but it is confirmed that the skill tree is pretty massive, so I do really hope we can get some sort of playstyle customization like this to make each and every playthrough a little bit different from the last. Moving on to the next thing on the list, and that is that I would love for this game to have some really memorable boss fights scattered throughout, because in my opinion, great boss fights are often what people remember the most about great single player games. And especially in the Star Wars universe where there's potential for some really cool and powerful villains, I think it's an absolute must-have for this game. It was already shown in some of the Game Changers footage last week that we will obviously be fighting the Ninth Sister, and the gameplay from that fight was actually really promising. She looked like a tough character to face, and not only that, but she did look like her fighting style was pretty unique from what some of the other villains might have, which is always a good thing. If you haven't actually seen that gameplay, then I will put a link in the description to my good friend the Twisted Jedi's video where he was actually able to show off some of the Game Changers footage, because yeah, that gameplay did look really promising, so make sure to go and check that one out after the video. Now, other than the Ninth Sister, I think it's safe to say there will also be a fight against the Second Sister as well, since she's kind of been portrayed as the main villain in pretty much every trailer so far. And if she is the main boss fight, then I really hope it ends up being like an all-time great saber battle, because like I said, nothing makes a game more memorable than a really good boss fight, especially when it's kind of the last big sequence of the game. As for other villains, I wouldn't be completely surprised if we do see some other Inquisitors too. If we're going to see 2 already, then I don't think it's far-fetched that there could be even more throughout the game too, but at the same time, I'm not going to get my hopes up for it too much just in case it doesn't happen. There is also the section of the trailer where Cal comes up against that massive bird in what looks to be like some sort of cave or something like that, and hopefully if there aren't any more Inquisitors, then we will at least get some really good boss fights against creatures like that, but again, we will just have to wait and see. Now, moving on to the next thing on the list, and this is arguably the most important aspect to me, and this is that I really hope there are plenty of things to do throughout the game, not just within the main storyline, but also just side missions and looking around for little Easter eggs or upgrades for Cal and stuff like that. I would love to be able to get to secret little areas of the map and find different coloured kyber crystals for my saber, and maybe even find like old Jedi robes for Cal to wear in certain places that might not be very easy to find. Little additions like that really make the game a lot more enjoyable for me, and I'm sure most of you that do like single player games would probably agree. My ideal situation would be that Fallen Order is similar to a game like God of War, not so much in terms of how great the game is, because God of War is probably one of the better games that's ever been made, so that's an impossible comparison, but in terms of the length of the game and the amount of side missions, I do hope they're similar in that regard. In God of War, the main storyline was about a 20-hour journey from start to finish if you were to try and only focus on the main missions, but then if you want to try and get a bunch of the side missions done as well, I think it took about an average of 30.5 hours. To get 100% on the game though, as in finish everything there was to do and getting all the achievements, I'm fairly sure I've read that it took anywhere from 50 to 60 hours to get 100%. That's something that I do really want from Fallen Order, in that I do want to be able to go for 100% and get everything done within the game that I possibly can, and in doing that I really hope it ends up taking at least 50 hours to do it all, because for the first single player game for Star Wars within probably a decade, I really want to be able to savour the game and not just be finished with it within a week. For me personally, as long as the game is engaging enough, then the longer the game the better. Red Dead Redemption took me well over 100 hours and I didn't even get close to getting 100% on that game, and I loved how long it took me. So obviously it's not going to be that long, but I do hope that there are plenty of things to do within the game that it lasts us all a fairly long time. Moving on to the next thing on the list, and that is all to do with the immersion of the game, in that I really do want to get completely lost in the world when I'm playing and feel like I'm genuinely in a Star Wars universe. From what we have seen so far, other than maybe the lightsaber because the blade has looked a little off in my opinion, pretty much everything else we've seen has been really immersive and has really suited the Star Wars universe. From the AT-ST battle that we saw in the new gameplay to the stormtroopers and their voices within the helmet, everything has looked pretty decent and I'm hoping it stays consistent throughout the game. The audio so far has stood out to be probably the most realistic aspect of the game. It seems like they nailed the audio of Star Wars when it comes to the blasters and the lightsabers and stuff like that, and I think that's a really good place to start. I know some of you might be thinking that audio doesn't really matter, but trust me, if the blasters sound completely different and TIE fighters didn't make the proper iconic sound when they fly past us in cutscenes, that's a one-way track to taking the immersion completely out of the game. The visuals, at least for the most part, do all seem pretty immersive. Some of the level design looks really great so far, and despite a few of the smaller things like the saber that I mentioned, so far everything does look pretty immersive. So again, we are going to have to wait and see, but I am hopeful that we can all just play this game and just completely escape from the real world while we're playing it, because for me that's probably one of the most entertaining parts of any good single player experience. Now, the last thing on this list is a pretty obvious one, and this is simply that I really want this game to be successful and not to be another failure of a Star Wars game from EA. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love Battlefront 2 and I always will, but the game probably is considered a failure by most people, and I'm really just hoping we can avoid that with Fallen Order. Star Wars really needs something big with this game. The sequel trilogy has been a little bit touch and go, to put it nicely. Star Wars overall has just been a bit down lately, and I think a game like Fallen Order being successful, as well as some things like Mandalorian, which also drops around the same time, being successful too, could really push Star Wars in the right direction again and get it all back to where we want it to be. I'm not asking for Fallen Order to be the best game of all time, I'm not asking for anything crazy. All I want is for it to be a successful game where it doesn't really have any issues and where most people who played it really enjoyed it and just had a good experience overall. With Respawn's track record and with everything we've seen so far, I do think the game has a good chance of being successful, but as I've said a few times now, we will just have to wait and see. So that is going to be it for this one, guys. If you did enjoy the video, then make sure to smash that like button to help support the channel. Like I said, I'll be back in about a week with another video like this time talking about 5 things I don't want in the game, and between then and now there'll obviously be plenty more Battlefront 2 content as well, so make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any of that. Thank you all so much for watching, you guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.